you've got to remember that it is a foundational technology and does interlink with all the other technologies. So, for instance, we just put out our engineering, biology, vision. Those two interlink quite a lot. We've got semiconductors, which is one of our 5 critical technologies. Again, there is a clear link. So we don't really see it as such defined silos.
Have you begun a gap analysis of the existing regulators' powers, as we recommended in our last report on AI?
So I think that speaks to what I was just talking about a moment ago, the fact that that is very much at the heart of the work of the central risk function, to be able to support those regulators. We're in regular contact with the regulators, as are the lead departments. This is something that we'll come back to in more detail in our response to the white paper, and we have got the DRCF as well.
And will you be offering additional support to the regulators, given AI is bound to increase their workload?
Yeah, I mean, that is what we're doing by regularly talking to those regulators and utilising the central risk support, which acts as a support function in essence. And I know that lead departments as well are particularly working on this, as we are with them.
You previously made a completely sensible point that if you set up one body for AI, then it would end up replicating what was happening elsewhere. But there are already forums for corporations, the Digital Regulation Corporation Forum. Do you think that should be expanded and given extra resources?
Well, we've just recently given that £2 million to assist and to help with some of the issues that you're alluding to that could become issues. So I agree, they're performing a very useful function.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just on the Digital Regulation Corporation Forum, it's a self-selecting group of regulators that work together. And obviously, for the point that you've said, AI touches many more. What would be the process for considering who should be part of that in future? Is that for you or is it for them?
As you say, I mean, it is self-selecting. But we will continue to look at these issues in the round. If we found that there were gaps with our regulators, then we would be open to thinking of other forums or support functions to be able to assist them. What we want to do is make sure that we have the regulation and the right mechanisms in place to be on the front foot on this agenda.
And I think those conversations are already happening. It's not everything has to be in a kind of defined forum and setup. So you'd have, for example, regulators who are involved in employment issues or regulators who are involved in education issues coming together to discuss how AI affects their area of work. Those aren't all kind of codified systems, and I don't think they necessarily need to be.
In its interim report, the committee was broadly positive about the intention to work through existing regulators, but agreed with the government that there will be gaps there. That gap analysis that is being undertaken, do you expect that to be published as part of the response to the white paper?
So we haven't done it as formally as you are identifying, but we are looking at this in general as we go along all the time. But we will be talking about this topic within our response to the white paper, yes.
Should it not be done formally?
Well, I think this is an ongoing process, surely, because AI is an emerging technology. So if we were to do one gap analysis now, in a few months' time, it might be totally different. So we need to be constantly doing that gap analysis, is what I'm saying, by working hand in hand with the regulators, by utilising the central risk function, by utilising forums like the DRCF. That's why we gave it some public funding of £2 million. But we'll be constantly re-evaluating this. And there will be further information in the white paper. I don't want to sort of preempt everything today.
And it is a systematic approach in the sense that we are going through all of the regulators systematically and asking the right questions about capabilities, powers, principles, and so on.
I mean, given we all learn in government and learn lessons for how to do things. We've had the COVID pandemic and preparedness against an unexpected threat is one of the key reflections that we make on this. And when it comes to AI, we don't know precisely where the threat is going to come from. So systematic preparedness, it would seem to me, would be a good administrative principle. So, Ms. Mumby, you said it's systematic. Can and should this analysis, this gap analysis, be shared and no doubt be kept updated?
I think this comes exactly to the point the Secretary of State has been making, which is it's a continuous process. So doubtless there may come a point where it's appropriate to share more details about it. But if I may just give you a little bit of a sense of what those conversations look and feel like, sometimes you're talking to a regulator where the discussion is moving from an initial discussion about capability and whether they have, for example, the right expertise on their board, through into, okay, now as we've built our capability, we have reflected more on questions about our powers, and the thing that we originally thought we might have needed, we now no longer think we need. It is a genuinely iterative approach. If I thought at this point we were in a position to say in a sufficiently kind of clear and robust way, these are exactly the three gaps, then of course we would act on them. But in fact, that isn't the way the conversations are going. In the main, in fact, because our fundamental framework is about outcome-based regulation, typically the regulators already have the fundamental legislative underpinning they need about outcomes. This is more about guidance, and, for example, you already have obligations under data protection around fairness and non-discrimination. The question is now, how do you comply with those obligations in a more sophisticated data environment? That's a question for ICO guidance, not a question about ICO powers or enforcement levels or something like that.
Thank you very much. Stephen Metcalfe and Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Just following on from Graham's initial questions and recognising that AI is a foundation technology. You said 6% of staff within the department are working directly on AI. Is there any kind of upskilling training programme for the other 94%? Because everyone needs to know about this technology, and obviously as the department charged with looking after it, we'd expect all the staff to have some sort of knowledge.
Would you like me to take that one? So, I mean, yes, absolutely. It's an excellent point. And if I may, it isn't just AI. Actually, that's only one of the technologies that we want to see upskilled across both the department and the wider civil service. You might know at the moment there's an initiative this year to ensure that every civil servant across the system gets 7 hours of training related to data. That's the One Big Thing initiative. We're making sure that we implement that in the department. I think that's a really important foundation. But we've also got a whole range of different levels of skill building, including apprenticeships, and those can be at postgraduate level for our staff on these issues. I also think, though, it's important to come back to what the Secretary of State said about bringing in truly cutting-edge expertise. I do think we need a balance where everybody is kind of sheep-dipped, but we also have some people who are who have a background from outside the service, who are really close to the cutting edge of this frontier technology.
So I think that's one of the things that our department has done differently as well, because we really have brought on board a number of experts, including if you look at the task force that's now the Institute. And we've also started an expert exchange programme, and we're going to make sure that we're getting civil servants out into industry as well a lot more, so that you've got that two-way street and you're updating skills. And also, we don't just rely on our in-house expertise. If you look at the summit, for instance, we were really clear that we needed civil society there. We needed academics, we needed experts, we needed scientists. And we've taken the same approach across the board. So we've got an expert advisory panel to our task force that's now our institute, with people like Joshua Bengio, that's world leading, known as one of the godfathers of AI. We've got that same approach across all areas that we represent, because we want to be a department that is really listening and engaged. And these technologies are emerging so quickly that unless we have that approach, we wouldn't have that skill set that is really up to date.
I think that's right. So, I mean, the approach that the UK government, the department, has taken, was that with reference to what other countries have been doing, or was that sort of a standalone, we'll just look at what we need? I mean, I'm particularly thinking about, and would be interested in your views on what the Americans have said, particularly, with the White House executive order back in November, and of course then the EU have published their AI Act. I'd like views on both of those, but also how you came to the decisions you have.
So I think it's really important that we don't see this as just silos of each country doing their own thing. Every country will have a slightly different approach. That is expected. But we were very clear, and that's why we created the summit in the first place and convened the world, that actually AI doesn't respect geographical boundaries. There does need to be some synergy in our approaches, and we do need to collectively gain a better understanding of the risks, especially around frontier AI, because that presents the biggest risks as well as the biggest opportunities. And that's why we carved out that path of the summit, and there's going to be future summits which have already been announced, the first one in the Republic of Korea and then the next one after that in France. And we got those agreements at the summit, like the Bletchley Declaration. Now, when it comes to the domestic policies that countries have taken on board, I actually see them as complementary. So it's no coincidence that the White House published their executive order on the same week as the summit. It's because we're, to quote their team, we're working in lockstep together. It's also no coincidence that they announced that they were also going to have an institute, like we're going to have an institute, and the two can complement one another. We are slightly different in our approach to the EU, and we've made no secret of that, because we want to be fostering innovation. We want to be the home of jobs in AI, and we already are the third market for AI. We want to retain that and do even better. But of course, we want to do it in a safe way as well.
Excellent, thank you. I should have made a declaration earlier. I co-chair the all-party group for AI, so it's something I've had an interest in for the last sort of 7 years, so just put that on the record. The EU have taken a slightly different approach, you said. I mean, they've taken this sort of level of risk approach. Now, I think the government is right not to have brought legislation forward in the King's Speech. I was actually quite pleased, because I think from all the discussions we've had, it's not clear yet what you're actually trying to legislate. Everyone's running around going, legislate, what? Because people aren't actually giving us that answers. But that said, there must be some good ideas out there. Categorising AI tools by the level of risk potentially is one of them. What's your view on that? And there is this question that if we aren't going to legislate, which I said, which I think is correct at the moment, there are those who say that that will give the EU and the US an advantage over us in this quite rapidly changing environment over the next year as new models emerge. Do you agree with that?
So on your first point, you're right in terms of, so we've got the high-level information of what the EU AI Act is doing. The full thing's not been published, and obviously that is subject to change, so I caveat my remarks in that regard. But what they are doing, you're right, is basically codifying sectors based on risk, which is quite a blunt tool and doesn't allow much scope within those sectors, whereas we're taking an approach that is much more context-based. They are also setting up the EU AI office that will regulate AI and be able to do the evaluations. But like I said, that's going to take many years, 2 to 3 years. This whole thing will have moved on dramatically by that point. So I don't think we're going to be left behind or lagging behind. In fact, we're leading the way at the moment. We've invested more than any other nation in this agenda. We're the only ones that have an institute that is up and running and capable of evaluating this next set, this next generation of models that's about to come out in the coming months. But we shouldn't see this as us in isolation and their policy. They all interlink and support one another as well. You know, the vast majority of these companies are based in America. It is helpful that they too are shining a spotlight on this issue. That was the whole point of Bletchley and the summit. We wanted the rest of the world to recognise the huge risks around frontier AI and the huge opportunities, and for us to all act together in the ways that work best with our constitutions and our approaches.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Rebecca Long-Bailey and then James Davis.
Thank you. Secretary, when can we expect the AI Safety Institute to be fully operational and a management team in place?
So we already have Ian Hogarth that was leading on the task force, and he continues. He's got a long-standing, fantastic career and deep understanding of AI, including at the frontier. And we have the team of well-established experts with the expert advisory panel, who I mentioned before, includes Joshua Bengio, includes people like Anne-Keith Butler from GCHQ. So these are incredible minds that will be able to support on this work. They have already done evaluations of models. They did demonstrations at the AI Safety Summit, and I would like to offer that invitation for the committee in private to see those demonstrations in the new year, which I'm sure you will find very useful and illuminating as well. But what they will be in a position to do now is to be able to evaluate those next generation of models when they come out. But obviously we will constantly be adding to that team of individuals and developing our skill set, and they will constantly be developing their approach and the way that they tackle this as models over time change.
And has the safety test work begun that was announced at the summit?
Yeah, so that is the evaluation stuff. So we haven't evaluated the next generation of models because they're not ready to be evaluated yet. We have already evaluated some of the previous models, and that was why we were in a position to do those demonstrations that you can be party to in the new year.
And in relation to the leadership team, can you describe what mitigations have been put in place to address potential conflicts of interest? So, for example, you mentioned Ian Hogarth and maybe other members of the Institute who were conflicted also.
Yeah, I'll bring Sarah in a minute, but what I would say on this is that if you really like, this is the cutting edge of AI. So this is the existing highly capable models, or those that are about to come out. The people that truly understand this area, a number of people allege that you can only fit those people into one train carriage. So that just illuminates how these skill sets are quite sparse, and we're talking about a real specific area. So if you want people that are experts in this field, that have the knowledge of industry and academia and can really bring those adequate skills to the table, they're naturally going to have some conflicts of interest, because otherwise they've had nothing to do with AI and they're not the type of people that you want. So I think we have to start from that premise to understand. But absolutely, we need all of that to be cleared now.
Happy to talk about the process in a little bit more detail. We've taken this exceptionally seriously for the reasons that the Secretary of State outlines. Having a robust conflicts process is necessary to get the right talent in, while of course protecting the public. So somebody like Ian, for example, would inevitably have a wide range of holdings in companies. And our principle is that, first of all, we begin by defining the scope of the task force. And Ian, as is on public record, has agreed to divest all of his holdings that relate to that scope. I should say, by the way, that is a significant personal cost to Ian. And all of those divestments will take place at the value of the holding at the time of Ian's appointments. So he has not been able to make any financial advantage whatsoever from any of the interactions he's had as part of the task force. And I mean, I personally sat with Ian and went through every single line of his portfolio, and I'm absolutely satisfied that we've taken a robust approach. And as you can imagine, we then scale that approach to other members of the task force. It's not identical for every individual, because people will have different levels of exposure to policy, for example. But we've actually built a conflicts capability dedicated to the task force, exactly so that we can have these conversations in a robust, systematic and, if I may say, pacey way, so that we can bring people on quickly.
And will the department be publishing a declaration of outside interests for any of the leadership team?
We wouldn't usually do anything different from what we do in the normal structures for civil servants and public appointments.
So there wouldn't be any documentary evidence, shall we say, of all of the divestments that you've just explained?
It may be that at the point at which those divestments are complete, we provide further details, but it's not usual to provide an ongoing update on individual shareholdings of members of our team, not least because if we did, that would actually be market moving in some of these cases. If you have large holdings in individual privately held companies, I don't think it would be appropriate to give kind of running updates on where those things stand.
Okay, so we just have to take your word for it that there's no conflict of interest then?
Well, that is ultimately how the conflicts of interest process in government usually works.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think it's fair to observe that Ian Hogarth is unpaid for his role.
right.
Is it not? James Davis and then Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Chair. Returning to the AI white paper and the government's response to the consultation exercise, do you expect that the AI Safety Institute will have a role in that?
So they are a part of the department, and they certainly support, as other civil servants and officials do. And there are sections of that response, without me sort of detailing exactly what's in it before it's published, that relate to the institute, in which they will have fed in to.
Okay, thank you very much. And in terms of the institute, do you expect its remit to expand over time? Question to either or both of you, really.
What we've said it's basically got 3 core functions. First of all, to evaluate, and we've spoken at length about that, and that is really important. And then secondly, around research, to make sure that we can stay at the top of the pack in terms of understanding the risks. And then also about information exchange, to be able to support other countries. As I said before, this is very much about internationally us working together, which was at the heart of the summit. But I do think that we will constantly have to evaluate the work of the Institute and what else it should or shouldn't be doing. And again, that speaks to the heart of what our approach here is, to be very agile. This is an emerging technology. It's emerging quicker than any technology we've ever seen. Therefore, we need to make sure that our systems and processes can keep pace with that and respond to those changes where needed.
Thank you. Now, at the autumn statement, there was further funding for the UK AI research resource, and I wondered if you could update the committee on preparations relating to that, and when you might expect the first research projects to get underway.
Yeah, so this is basically our compute capacity. And there's several lines of funding of what we've secured. So one of those is the AI research resource that we'd already funded, and that's going to be based in Bristol, and that will come on stream in about summer next year. And we're just working out the details of how that would be accessed. And we're talking about increasing our compute capacity by at least 10 to 100. So it will be game changing. There's also going to be a facility that will come on stream within a few weeks, and that will be in Cambridge. And then we have our exascale programme, which is 900 million, and that is going to be based in Edinburgh. And what we announced at the autumn statement was additional money on top of all of that to really turbocharge our compute capacity. And we'll keep coming back to this, and it's important that we have the compute capacity to be leading the way on this. And also, you will have seen that Microsoft have just announced a sizable investment here in the UK, which again helps support our compute capacity as well.
So in terms of that supercomputer capacity, how will we stay up to date with technological advances?
So compute capacity is just one aspect of AI. One of the studies that I've read have said, Ben Buchanan describes it as the AI quartet, of which one factor is compute. One factor is also algorithms, one is data, and one is skills. And we're trying to make sure that we are investing in all of those, including in skills, where we've invested 290 million since 2014. But we're not going to miss a trick, if you like, and that's why we're also making sure that we are investing in compute, but we're also doing that not just with taxpayers' money, but working with private industry as well.
Okay. And final question from me for now. Should the investment in compute be viewed as a precursor to the UK establishing a sovereign large language model?
No, I think that investing in compute gives us more flexibility and capacity, but our priority needs to be in making sure that we are deploying AI appropriately throughout our public services, so that the general public is actually seizing the benefits of this. That's the whole point as to why we need to grip the risks, because this is transformative, and it already is in our NHS, for instance. Just a few weeks ago, I saw surgeons use research into how surgeons can utilise AI to perform more knee surgeries in a day, which will help cut waiting lists. We already know that it is utilised in hospitals to detect strokes, to detect heart disease, to prevent strokes. So this technology is already in our public services, what we're talking about is being able to intensify and amplify that and make sure that we get the benefits to the public. We've just set up the Cabinet Office with Number 10 and accelerator incubator unit that will be looking at this very question. They've been hiring additional people to be able to facilitate that. We will be supporting with that, with our expertise that we have gathered in this area.
Thank you, James. Can I just ask what the purpose of this publicly provided compute capacity is? Is it to make Britain more attractive to big players like Microsoft and Google, to in effect sort of subsidise them and allow them to, or encourage them to be here? Or is it rather the opposite, to kind of rebalance the playing field so that smaller players are able to access compute resource so they can compete with those with bigger pockets? What's the intention?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, it's not so that the taxpayer can fund the likes of Google to have access to compute. This is about enabling researchers to be able to have access, and we will look at the exact mechanics of how smaller businesses would be able to access that, and we're working through all of that. We'll publish some details.
It's in our interim report, we talk about the access to compute challenge, about smaller players not having the deep pockets.
Yeah,
so this is squarely about that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you said you're thinking about the access requirements, and that is, I assume, therefore, to exclude those that have adequate resources of their own and make it available to those that need that help to make the market.
We're going to come
contestable.
forward with the exact details of how this will work, but I think the name on the tin is, the research resource. So sort of will do what it says it's going to do.
When you say research resource, is this for kind of academic research or for developers, small developers, for commercial purposes?
So we are looking at how exactly this will work, and we will publish further details on it, outlining exactly how that will work.
In the white paper response or separate to it?
It will be separate to it.
Thank you very much. Graham Stringer and then Chris Luxon.
In September, this committee went to the United States and we talked to the tech companies, academics, private sector politicians about AI. My view, I'm not sure if it's shared by the committee or not, was that most of the people we spoke to were quite relaxed about the development of AI. The exception really were academics at Harvard and other places who were not worried about the technology itself, but were very worried that the tech companies are controlled by a small number of very clever people who are libertarian and have scant regard for democracy. You've obviously thought deeply about AI. Would you agree with that analysis of the Harvard academics?
No, absolutely not. So I regularly meet with the leading AI companies and their leadership teams. And actually, they have been very uneasy at the current situation. And you could describe it as a democratic deficit. You could describe it as them marking their own homework. And the proof is in the pudding with the fact that they voluntarily signed up to that landmark agreement at Bletchley Park to allow for pre-deployment testing. The fact that when I asked them to publish their safety policies, they did, which was the first instance of pure transparency. And in addition, we keep working with them because we want to make sure that not only is the government taking action in this space, or the EU or the US, but that they are continually raising the bar on their safety policies. That's why I've called for them all to adopt as a minimum something called responsible capability scaling. But your characterisation is not the characterisation that I have seen. It
wasn't my characterisation.
Or your second-hand characterisation there. I mean, I was in America after you a few weeks ago, and I was speaking to academics in Stanford, and that wasn't their interpretation.
Thank you. This country has had a very poor record on productivity over the last 14, 15, over quite a long time. I'm not trying to make a party political point on that, but we've had really zero increase in productivity. Your department is contributing to the public sector productivity programme led from the Treasury. When do you expect that to deliver? When will we see the impact in increased productivity?
I'll bring Sarah in here on this one.
I think it's probably going to vary because there are a whole series of different initiatives across government working on the topic of how you use AI to improve public sector productivity, some of which have been established for some time actually and predate much of the discussion that we're having here, some of which will be in their early stages and will take longer to come through. So I don't think it's possible to give a single answer to that. I mean, I think our colleagues who are responsible for digital and data implementation across government, and of course AI is just sort of the next phase of that ongoing work, would say there have already been significant productivity improvements from those efforts in particular areas, and we're likely to see that continue. It's going to be one of the absolutely core planks of that productivity review, as you rightly say.
And looking away from AI, of course, we are on track to meet our commitment to be investing record levels of research and development funding, so over £20 billion a year by next year, which we know is a key driver to increasing productivity.
I've been in politics long enough to have seen word processors introduced into offices that were going to massively increase productivity. You now walk through any factory, business, office, and there are probably 2 or 3 computers at people's elbow. Yet we do not see any increase in productivity in the national stats. You can see an increase in productivity in one particular industry, and you've outlined how AI can improve productivity in medicine. No disagreement there. But we never seem to see it come out in the final GDP productivity figures. Why will AI be different from this huge increase in computing power we've seen throughout the economy, which hasn't effectively changed productivity?
Well, I think because this technology will be truly transformative, and the opportunities that it is presenting are arguably bigger than we've ever experienced before. So if you just look at the scale of the change, so 4 years ago, large language models could barely string a coherent sentence together. Now they can pass the bar exam, they can pass medical exams, and who knows what the next set of models are going to be able to do. So that just highlights how they really will be able to turbocharge everything that we do. But the key will be making sure that we're securing adoption throughout not just the private sector, but our public services that we spoke about before, and that we're using this in the right way so that it does increase our productivity and our efficiency.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Just to pick up one of the questions that Graham put to you, he relayed a characterisation that a lot of the players in this space are concentrating on the tech, have not much interest in public policy, take a rather sort of libertarian approach, and you rejected that as being not in your experience. And you said, to the contrary, some of the leading players are very keen to engage with public policy and voluntary commitments. Well, I guess in the words of Mandy Rice Davies, they would say that, wouldn't they? In the sense that if you're a large player and you've made some advances in competition law, which Ms. Munby had responsibility for in a previous incarnation, blocking the path for others to follow you is something that incumbents tend to do. Are you alive to that risk?
Yeah, so first of all, we don't just engage with those that are leading at the frontier, and that's evident from the approach that we took in the summit, where we had businesses that were represented from 5 employees up to thousands. We also had civil society experts from across the world at that summit as well. And I think it's really important that when we're developing our policies, we're listening to that cross-section of views. Now, that is a concern that was originally presented to me quite early on when I took the role. And I worked hard to engage with that cross-section of individuals and make it really clear that we weren't pulling up the drawbridge and stopping everybody else from getting to that same level. What we were talking about is actually what safety mechanisms and policies and mitigations do we need at the very frontier, not to stop everybody from getting there, but things that the companies need to do more of, like responsible capability scaling, access and transparency to enable us to do the evaluations, Also ensuring that we have a better understanding of the risks, that we can keep updating our mitigation policies, etc., and working with those companies. So I think we definitely should be really clear that it's not about pulling up the drawbridge and stopping innovation. It's the opposite. In fact, our whole policy in this country is based on pro-innovation, supporting industry and supporting job creation.
Accepting that that is absolutely the intention, you described...
And the policy.
And the policy. In developing that policy, and it's under development, as you were saying, you described the number of people you have in the department. Do you have any concerns, and what can you do about the fact that inevitably the largest players have many times more people working to influence you than you have to respond to them, and many times more than the smallest players? How do you deal with that imbalance?
So a number of ways. First of all, we've brought some members of civil society into the department as well. It's not just industry that we've brought in. We've also brought in people that are from those smaller businesses, and we engage regularly with them, and we use them as sounding boards, etc., and stakeholder engagement. And we make sure that as ministers, we are responsible in terms of the time that we dedicate across that sort of whole AI ecosystem, and the same with officials as well.
And I happen to know some people that work for your team, and I think it's worth saying in public that you've got an impressive record in drawing some of the really excellent people from the private sector into public service in this way. Let me ask one further question on this before I turn to Chris Clarkson. One of the big questions for policymakers in which different companies do have very strong views is the question of open source.
Yes.
There are some very large players that say allowing open source access is very dangerous and it should be therefore restricted to trusted providers. There are some other big companies that say quite the reverse, that actually to get the full contestability and innovation, open source should not only be allowed, but may even need to be mandated. Yeah. How's the department, how's the government going to resolve this dilemma?
Quite right. That's certainly how the debate is currently framed. And it is something that we need to continue to do more thinking on. It isn't dealt with as far as I can see from the headline information that we've been given on the EU AI Act. So it's something that not only do we need to think about, other countries do as well. It's something that we put on the agenda within various points of the summit for discussion. But I actually think we need to reframe this debate, because at the moment it is seen as very binary. It's either open source is a very good thing or it's a very bad thing. And I was speaking to Irene from Hugging Face, and she represents the view that I share, which is very much that actually surely our concern should be around the capability. And sometimes, depending on the capability, you would be less concerned if it was open source. But again, if it was it had what could present more risks in terms of the capability, you'd be more concerned. So I think we need to be more mature in our approach to the conversation and therefore in our policies responding to it. But I think this is very much a nascent policy area in every country at the moment, and one that we are continuing to explore further.
But insofar as Britain's having a distinctive take on this, and I think it's fair to describe the tenor of your evidence to this committee and your statements in public, that it is pro-innovation, it would be reasonable to infer that open source is more likely to be encouraging of innovation than something that is very restrictive. Is that a reasonable
Yes, we're not, as a government, anti-open source. And we recognise the huge benefits that it can bring, not just in innovation, but also in terms of equality when it comes to AI, which is another concern, and the concentration of power. But what I'm saying is that I think we should be less binary in our approach to this and focus more on the capabilities, which is at the heart of the issue. But we need to further delve into this topic. And that goes back to what I was saying before as to why it's so important that we've brought the experts on board, that we're really delving into some of these issues and the risk agenda as well.
Thank you very much. So finally on AI, Chris Clarkson.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to turn to a subject which I don't think anybody really has thought about at any stage of this table, which is elections. We are all aware of, for example, a few months ago, there was some audio purporting to be the leader of the opposition, to engage in a swearing rant. That was a deep fake. There is a decent chance that there is going to be some AI involvement in the next election, whenever that next comes, whether that's in the forms of deep fakes or generated content. Has your department given any consideration as to whether or not the Electoral Commission requires any further powers to deal with that?
So on elections in general, so at the moment people could go and do Photoshop, for instance. What AI will enable is for deepfakes to be much more sophisticated and easier for people to think that they're authentic, and also easier for people to do them in their home, basically, without requiring really expensive software, potentially. So it amplifies an existing risk. It's not an entirely new risk. And this is something that we have been concerned about, obviously, as we approach an election, as is every other country. That's why I personally made sure it was on the agenda at the summit, and that we spoke about it with our allies as well, who equally are facing elections too. And we will continue to work with them on our approach and our learning in this area. We're also working very closely with the leading tech companies too, because whilst tech is presenting some of the problems here, it also presents some of the solutions. So there's things like watermarking, there's also technology that can detect if it is AI generated or not. Now there's debates over whether they will be robust enough or whether they can be jailbreaked. But if you put that aside, they potentially are some of the solutions. Then we're also in talks with social media companies as well as to what can we get in terms of agreements for when an election is called. And the core of this work is actually being led by the Security Minister in the Defending Democracy Task Force. And he will be further examining our current regulations and legislations in relation to the Election Commission, who do have a great deal of power already in this space. But that is certainly a topic that he will be leading on.
But is DSIT actively involved in the Defending Democracy Task Force?
We have a seat at the table.
And do you feel that you are getting adequate input into that in terms of your remit?
Yeah, so not only do we have a seat at the table, but I regularly meet with the Security Minister because there's a lot in our agendas that cross over if we're looking at especially social media and other topics. So regularly have stock takes and things. I think I've got one next week.
Going back to the piece about regulation that we discussed earlier, so what other organisations do you think are going to have to play a role in ensuring that there is a robust way of monitoring where AI is used in electoral campaigning? I mean, obviously you have that convening power as a department. You're looking at how we're going to regulate this, and I think the general direction of travel is that we'll enable existing regulators. Do you think, A, that you have the adequate bandwidth to ensure that they have the ability to do this, i.e. fill the knowledge gaps, or do you think that it's going to be something that's going to require a certain level of industry input as well?
I do think it does need some industry input as well, which is why we're working very closely with the social media companies as well, because that is the way in which these AI deepfakes will spread extremely quickly. So it will be we will need them on board to be able to act quickly as well. And we're also working with industry, as I said a moment ago, to ensure that when the solutions to these problems are being developed, things like watermarking and AI technology to detect if it's AI generated, that we're in a position to be able to deploy that, including on things like elections. And we're staying on top of this agenda. Every country is facing this issue. It isn't, as I said, new risks, it's amplifying existing risks. And that is something that is in general what AI does. And in our risk documents that we published ahead of the summit, we were the first in the world to do that. One was produced by GoScience, so our leading scientists, and one was produced by our intelligence services. They basically summarised the risk, but they articulated that they are amplifying existing risks.
Will you be encouraging platforms to follow Meta's example and require advertisers to actually flag when there is AI used in content?
I mean, that's only part of the issue that is of concern when it comes to elections, because the biggest threat is not, I would argue, not an advert, but more of a crude image or a crude video that is shared multiple times between individuals rather than formally advertised and paid for on a platform. Things will go viral without that mechanism. So we need to make sure that social media companies are looking at this in the round.
I completely agree with you. It does have an amplifying effect. I mean, for example, if Tracy photoshops a picture of me kicking a puppy, it's not as potent as a video of me kicking a puppy. Not that I ever kick puppies. I'm more of a cat person. But
Kick cats?
Oh, he said it.
Depends what colour rosette they're wearing. But do you, coming off the back of that, do you think that there is a space within the Defending Democracy Task Force to actually set up some sort of almost regulatory framework for how this is going to work? I mean, is that the eventual outcome of the task force, or is the task force going to come up with some sort of flavour recommendations for what people need to do? How prescriptive is it going to be?
I can't predetermine the exact end goal of the Defending Democracy Task Force. What I can say is that this government is taking this extremely seriously. We set up a whole task force dedicated to it, led by the Security Minister. He is supported by my department that have got many work streams on this agenda. It's why I put it on the summit's agenda. It's why I'm talking to my counterparts on it. When I went to America on my departmental visit a few weeks ago, it was one of the topics I was certainly talking to them about as well, because we need to work together with our allies on this.
So I completely agree with you on that. I mean, obviously the US, Canada, us, various other countries having elections. Is there any shared learning from that, from those discussions already?
There is certainly in terms of our approaches, and we need to continue to share that learning and make sure that we can grapple this issue together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. There were a couple of brief supplementaries, please, from Stephen and then Catherine.
Thank you very much. I think there is no doubt that this is a big risk, and that it will play a part in the next election. I completely agree. It's amplifying an existing risk. A lot of what can be done could be done, but this technology allows it to be done at scale.
Yes.
So the other part of this, for any of that to work, is for us to be susceptible to the output of AI. What measures, steps is the government taking to make the general public, us, more informed about the risks of being misled by AI? An awareness campaign. We grow up with certain technologies and we become comfortable with those, and then new technologies come along, and this has the potential to mislead us. We need to be more sceptical. How can we create a more sceptical public who don't believe everything they see or hear?
I suppose first of all, you do have to be quite careful on that. I've read studies of which suggest that there is a concern that you go too far on that agenda and then people turn off all news. And so obviously you've got to enable and inform people to better be able to decipher which sources are more likely to be credible over others. And it is difficult when it comes to AI because it can look indistinguishable between verified sources. And one of the things that we put within the Online Safety Act was a clear work stream around media literacy, tasking Ofcom, and this is something that we'll continue to double down on. And I know industry themselves are trying to do more in this space as well. And we're starting from a younger age as well, so that we can better inform the next generation upwards. But as this becomes more and more sophisticated, this is something we are going to continually have to revisit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. Just returning to kind of measures to mitigate the potential risk of electoral fraud. I just want to press you slightly on timescales because I grant you that as this technology evolves, there requires evolving solutions and a flexibility. But we have got, for example, local elections coming up in May, and there's some quite big elections across the country, and it strikes me that that's an opportunity to maybe test some mitigations before any general election would be called. So can you perhaps just update us on, what's going to happen when? Because the worst case scenario would be we've got some really great solutions, but they're implemented 2 months after the next general election when Keir Starmer's been caught kicking a puppy, or do you see what I mean?
That won't be nice.
Why is your guys' obsessions with kicking?
No, but
no, I know what you mean.
There's a genuine fear that British democracy is going to get subsumed by some of our enemies that seek to undermine us. You just look at some of the fake news that's knocking around about the Gaza conflict at the moment.
So I can't speak for the exact timeframe of the Defending Democracy Task Force because obviously I don't lead that, the Security Minister does. What I can say is that we are working with social media companies to make sure that something would be in place relatively soon.
What does that look like?
We understand. I'm fully aware of the timeframes that we're working to in this country, and the potential risks here as well. Nobody has a silver bullet answer on this topic. As I said before, some of the potential technology solutions around watermarking and AI detection software, there are many critics of those who suggest that they will never be produced to a level that is beyond jailbreaking. So I just want to say there is no silver bullet, but this is something that the government is taking extremely seriously. We've got work streams that are working at pace, and we're working with our international counterparts as well, and we do have the Electoral Commission as well.
Yeah, so do you think that there's any chance of seeing maybe some trial efforts to mitigate before May's elections, for example?
So when you say trials, do you mean in terms of approaches from...
I mean in terms of something being delivered in the real world as opposed to, just a assessment and strategy and...
Yeah, so in terms of... we are working to be able to deliver something with social media companies that will be effective in this space. The Defending Democracy Task Force has many other strands to it and initiatives that will be pursued as well as. I can't talk to the time frame of that because we don't lead this work in entirety. In fact, this is led by another department, in essence. We're almost supporting via our networks and relationships.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
But just finally on this point, do you expect that to be in place for the next general election, or would the election be some sort of
I expect that by the next general election we will have robust mechanisms in place that will be able to tackle these topics. Absolutely, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to broaden our focus a bit. Having talked for an hour about artificial intelligence, we're now going to look more broadly at the work of the department. And to kick off our questions on that, I'm going to turn to my colleague Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you. In February, you set out 6 priorities. What progress have you made so far?
Yeah, so on those priorities, one of them was in essence about scale up, and that's one of the key priorities, I believe, to be able to advance our abilities to become a science and technology superpower. And there's a number of initiatives that we've took, but also supported by the Treasury on things like Mansion House reforms and LIFT's agenda. We also published our response to the spin-out review just last week, which included a £20 million fund for proof of concept. One of the other lines on that was around research and development, and we have pledged and are on track to have £20 billion spent by the taxpayer by next year. One of them was also around our international work, in essence, and we've obviously secured an agreement around Horizon. We did the Atlantic Declaration. We've got a wealth of MOUs. One of them was around our legislative agenda. We're on track in terms of progressing our data bill, our digital markets bill. One of them was around the Online Safety Act. We've published, we've completed the Online Safety Bill, and that is now an act. So we've been making tangible progress on all of those. And in addition, we now have a strategy or a vision for every single one of our 5 critical technologies. And one of the first things that we did as a department when we were formed was we produced the Science and Technology Framework, which I describe as basically like the blueprint to which our department is working to, but more than just our department, it's a cross-Whitehall document. And our role as this new department is to hold the other government departments to account, to make sure that we are delivering on that, and that we've got much more cohesion and synergy on this agenda.
One piece of good news yesterday was the announcement of your second DSIT HQ in the city of Salford. And there's 2, if I'm actually indulgent on this point, Chair. So there's 2 points on this that I'd like to address. So firstly, I note that your own personal tweet on this mentioned that the HQ was actually going to be in Salford, but a lot of the marketing information and videos that were sent out by the department referred to it as being in Manchester.
I believe technically Salford is in Greater Manchester.
It's in Greater Manchester. Yeah. It's not in Manchester.
It's still Greater Manchester.
There was a video yesterday.
This committee has many Northwestern MPs who these matters are very...
I think I'm all right to talk on it. I am from the Northwest. My dad's from Manchester, so I think I've got a bit of legitimacy here.
Rebecca.
It was quite disheartening, really. There was a video reel that lauded great achievements in the city of Manchester, whilst also announcing the birth of the new DSIT HQ in Salford. So if that's a point that the department can address going forward, and make it clear that it's in the city of Salford. But more importantly, I would like to see the new HQ benefit the residents of Salford. What action are you going to take specifically to ensure that employment opportunities are awarded to people from Salford in the new department?
Well, I think they will have complete access to. We want to make sure that we are. The reason why we're setting up departments across the country and making sure that we have lots of hubs is so that we can open up those opportunities in our civil service. So it isn't just concentrated on London or the South East. And with that in mind, we want to make sure that local people are having access to those jobs. Do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, we've got a lot of passionate Salfordians, if that's the appropriate alternative to Mancunians, in the office. And it's a wonderful opportunity where they're beginning to do work on reach out to local schools, reach out to local universities. There's, of course, a really thriving tech scene in the area, which we think gives us huge opportunities to access talent. So we're really enthusiastic about actually not just for DSIT, but for other digital and technology parts of government based in the area, including GHCQ, for example. We think we can work together to attract brilliant talent into the department to help fulfil our goals.
Thank you, that's very encouraging. And I offer my own services and also the services of Salford City Council in working with you on that basis to ensure that we've got a detailed strategy for outreach in Salford.
Absolutely, thank you.
But back onto the wider department priorities themselves. In the main estimates for 23 to 24, the administration costs for the department as a whole have been reduced by 12.5%, with some larger reductions of 20% in core areas such as staff costs. What are the implications of this reduction going to be on the running of the new department?
I think I'd probably need to see kind of exactly what number you're comparing to what number, but I think those are probably technical adjustments. We certainly haven't got a 20% reduction in our admin position kind of in any sense happening on the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just in terms of administration costs, obviously UKRI are a big source of the department's funds, the biggest. Do you have an understanding of the administration costs there and whether they are being reduced as they are in central government?
Obviously, there was the grant review to assist with the reforms of UKRI, because it is a very large organisation that has hoovered up many, and by its nature, we want to make sure that it is as efficient, as effective as possible. In fact, I met with Ottiline and Andrew just last week. We have regular meetings on this agenda, and they are making good progress on the grant review. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on the grant review.
Only to say specifically on your question about UKRI admin, at the last spending review, some quite ambitious targets were set for UKRI OPEX and headcount, and we work very closely with UKRI in making sure that we can deliver against that programme. But it's a very active set of work with clear targets that we've been asked to achieve.
One of the ambitions for UKRI when it was created following the nurse review was that there should be an agility, a kind of a paciness of response to, especially to investment opportunities when there was the possibility of commercial investment being backed by government investment. Have you made an assessment of how well you think it's doing in that agility to be able to land investments?
I think there's definitely still room for improvement, hence why we are working with UKRI and we are ensuring that progress is made on the grant review. And what we want to be doing in general is making sure that we're bringing in more private investment to supplement the taxpayers' money. So for every pound that the taxpayer spends on research and development, we estimate that it's about £2 that generates in terms of private investment. But if you look at some of the recent work that we've done with, for instance, the biobank, where we've got Eric Smith and Ken Griffin to contribute as well in terms of philanthropy, that shows how we are trying to make sure that it isn't just the same old approach of the taxpayer funding.
Thank you. Let me turn to Graham Stringer, then Stephen Metcalfe.
Can I say, Minister, that I'm quite relaxed whether you call it Manchester or Salford, because I represent both. So, But you say you want this country to be a scientific superpower. How would you define that?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, and we've got a whole framework that is dedicated to that mission. And there are many different ways that you can define it. I think one of them is to make sure that we are continually punching above our weight. So at the moment, we already have one out of only 3 economies in the world that is rated at over $1 trillion for our tech sector. We are a world leader when it comes to, one of the world leaders when it comes to life sciences. We have second of the most companies in quantum in the world. We really are excelling in a number of these ways. But the international competition on these agendas is really fierce. And so what we want to do is make sure that we aren't slipping backwards, but we're also channeling in inward investment. And there are 10 strands to that science and technology framework, so several different areas that we need to be progressing so that we can then achieve that goal by 2030. And we have a number of metrics that are also in our internal documents, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. So as part of the ODP, of course, we define metrics right across our picture. Without wishing to sort of bore you, I think it's important to note that there is no single metric for this, right? It's always going to be a basket of indicators. But that goes right from government and private R&D investment through to measures about citations, patents, through to VC and equity investment levels, through to GVA in some of the specific sectors that Michelle was talking about.
And also the soft power influence as well, because if you look at what we did with Bletchley and the AI Summit, that wasn't quantifiable in terms of figures, but it really did demonstrate that we were a world leader when it came to AI safety.
And yet, you mentioned slipping back. Just under 12 months ago, Kate Bingham made a pretty excoriating attack on the government science policy. She was a heroine of the COVID time, but she said that all the knowledge, all the information gained in that allowed us to be genuinely world leading in developing vaccines has been lost and stifled by civil servants. That we had lost investment in this country because JKN and AstraZeneca had invested elsewhere. So there's that side. At the same time, the Society of Chemical Industry have said almost the opposite of Kate, but the same basic point that we're not doing as well as we should. They think that they're not getting the support in the chemical industries that they need. And in a private meeting last week, we heard from astronomers that there are now less PhDs and postdocs in astronomy than there has been in the last quarter of a century. So I know it's not easy, and there's not one metric, I accept that. But do you accept that there is reason to be concerned there?
So I just wanted to pick, so you focus quite heavily, predominantly there on life sciences, and we had the Life Sciences Council the other week. It's as far as I'm aware, we're the only country in the world that have such a powerful forum. And we also had the Global Investment Summit the other week, at which many of the life sciences companies were represented. And that's certainly not the mood music that I was hearing. Equally, I had a roundtable conversation with a number of them the other day too, and what they were saying to me is that there were some issues, and the government has listened and acted. So if you look at the fact that we did the O'Shaughnessy review into clinical trials, we published our response in line with the autumn statement. We have secured the VPAG deal as well, which was providing a lot of uncertainty for a while as well. We did a 650 million Life Sciences Growth Fund. We also, in the autumn statement, had over 500 million for life sciences for manufacturing. We've had some really important announcements like the BioNTech announcement. Also, I mentioned the Biobank before. We've seen reform of the MHRA. So, yes, there were issues that had been raised, but I think the mood music that I was certainly hearing is that this is a government that has listened and acted.
Thanks. One of the benefits of leaving the European Union was that we were no longer constrained by some of their regulations. We have lost most of our agrochemical industry because of the EU's regulations on GM foods. Do you think we should be moving to allow more GM technology than were allowed under European regulations?
We published our engineering biology vision just last week or the week before. The weeks have merged into one, and we were saying that we want to be on the front foot on this agenda, and we dedicated £2 million, and we set out the strategy, if you like. And we've also creating a task force to look more deeper at the issues, a steering group, actually, that one. But we do need to have safety in mind and synergy as well with other international counterparts. So we should utilise Brexit for the opportunities that it presents, but we shouldn't utilise it to lower standards.
I agree. I mean, there's been more than 2 trillion meals served around the world with food that's being produced using GM technology. So it's not. I think it's fairly well proved that it's not dangerous. There are other areas of medicine as well as food where GM technology would be used. It has become an ideological battle, not a safety battle. And I would have expected, given both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, when we were in the European Union, argued that we should be allowed to develop GM technology, more progress than has been made since we left the EU. Do you think we should make more progress?
One of the things that we've done is we've tasked the Regulatory Horizon Council to look at the regulation in this space. And also one of the announcements that we made with the autumn statement is £5 million dedicated to a sandbox on engineering biology. So we are looking at how we can make our regulations more flexible and more agile to be able to support industry in this respect.
I think just as a comment, I think we could move a good deal faster. A final point question, if I may. Looking back on COVID and reflecting on both ministerial and science involvement, two things strike me. One, of all the ministers involved, there was a glaring absence of a science minister. And I'm pleased that we have a science minister in the cabinet now. Would you, if there is an epidemic, and hopefully there won't be, would you expect to be involved in a way that no science minister was involved last time? I'll come to the second part of the question, if I may, because that's later, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, so obviously there's the independent inquiry going on at the moment. I don't know whether this is something that they will identify as something as a lesson learnt. Obviously, this agenda was in the Department of Beza at the time, and I'm sure that the Secretary of State responsible was privy to a number of the conversations. But you're quite right. Now we have this department dedicated to science, innovation and technology. And the fact that life sciences itself is partially in our department and the Department for Health, I would anticipate that should there, and God forbid, be another pandemic like that, that we would play a leading role in that. Absolutely.
Thank you. The other thing, you may not remember, but at the end of the last Labour government, Alan Johnson, the Home Secretary, had a huge bust-up with his scientific advisor about the regrading of cannabis, where it would be. The advisor suggested the restriction should be lowered to a lower category. And Alan Johnson said, no, I'm the politician. No. At the end of that discussion and debate, it was agreed that scientific advice should be published separately and independently. And obviously, at the end of the day, ministers, politicians have to take the decisions because we're elected. During COVID, and I don't think we need the end of the inquiry to debate or discuss this, it was quite clear that the scientists were not giving their independent thoughts in public. They were coming out with a line at that time. Do you think that was a mistake?
I wasn't in those departments at the time. I was in the Department for Education, so I can't speak to what was or wasn't happening. And also there is an independent inquiry looking at all of these topics.
Yes, but we all saw what happened. I mean, it's common information. You only have to pick up a newspaper now, and you've got scientists saying, well, I thought this, and he thought that, and she thought the other.
We're always going to get scientific disagreement.
Do you not think we, as politicians, and not to mention the public, should have been privy to those independent scientific views rather than coming up with one view when science in the area of biology and medicine, it's not like astronomy or physics, which can be very precise. There are often different interpretations of the science. Do you not think we should have been privy to that debate?
Well, obviously we do have a chief scientific advisor, and they sit within my department, Angela McLean, who will obviously lead in terms of the thinking on the scientific agenda. I don't really think it is important that I don't speculate too much on these topics, because there is an independent inquiry into lessons that could have been learnt from COVID, and I wasn't within those departments to have seen firsthand what was and wasn't happening, to be able to speak from a knowledge point of view on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just relating to some of the questions that Graham asked you about life sciences. Graham and members of the committee went to the Rosalind Franklin laboratory outside Leamington Spa, which was set up to be a state-of-the-art testing facility for viruses and other purposes. Operating at great scale and had been in receipt of over £1 billion of taxpayers' funding to set it up and to establish it. It was run by Dame Anna Dominishak, a very distinguished, one of our most distinguished scientists. It's popped up for sale on Rightmove, which is a matter of astonishment to members of the committee and members of the science community, for whom this type of technical space is at a premium if we're to avoid the decline that Graham described. Are you aware of this, and have you given any consideration to stepping in to prevent this fire sale?
So we are regularly working with the sector and hearing concerns, and if there are issues, then we will consider where we should and shouldn't support.
Ms. Mumby?
I don't have any further details on the Rosalind Franklin specifically. Obviously, very happy to come back with more detail on that one. It sounds like a really specific point that is definitely worth us taking a look at.
Well, your Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, this is the country's flagship testing facility that was established partly, it has to be said, to avoid some of the poor practice, the beginning of the pandemic, when we didn't have testing capacity to be able to be searched. That's a separate matter as to whether its closure is going to repeat our lack of preparedness. But that is something we can consider separately. But I'm interested in your responsibility as the science department for the loss of a fully specified research and testing facility that the public has invested £1 billion in. Surely that should be something that is not only on your radar, but you should be stepping in to secure for the nation.
I'm absolutely sure it is on the department's radar. It's not something I'm briefed to talk in detail about today, but very happy to come back to you rapidly with all of the information you might need.
And I can tell you there are conversations going on, but we're not also at a position to detail any exact responses at this moment in time.
Do you happen to know whether it's funded from... It's on Rightmove at the moment. It's open to anyone interested in speculative property acquisition to buy, which doesn't seem to be a very satisfactory thing for an institution of our science base.
So as we've said, so we're in conversations, and when we're at a point that we can detail that more, we'll be able to write to you.
Let's move on to Stephen Metcalfe and then James Davis.
Thank you. Just a quick question really around the thinking process that takes place in the department. There are a number of reviews that take place, which you are then, as a department, required to respond to. So what I'm thinking about is how, when, for example, there was the independent review of university spin-outs. How does that align with previous reports that have been published, perhaps the nurse report, and then your response? Are you using all these reports to build a strategic, structured thinking way forward?
Yes, we are, and they do inform our sort of in general knowledge base, yes. And we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel and starting all over again. Absolutely, that would be a complete waste of resource. But we also need to make sure that we're not just constantly doing reviews and documentation, but actually delivering and producing outcomes, which is something that I'm relentlessly focused on. And that is the way that we will achieve on the 10 pillars of the science and technology framework.
Okay. And so when... have you published, sorry, this is my ignorance, have you published the response to the independent review on university
on the spin-outs? Yes, so we did that in line with the autumn statement.
And I would be able to look at that and find how that tracks back to the nurse review?
So you would see that we've accepted all of the recommendations of that review, that we dedicated 20 million towards a proof of concept fund. And one of the things that the nurse review said was that we needed to make sure that not only did we have more diversity in the landscape, but we had more security, more resilience as well. And what we're doing via the spin-out review is making sure that we're getting some of those ideas and those innovations out of our universities into be commercialised. Something that we're good at, but in summary, we could be even better.
Thank you. And just one final quick question. I mean, we looked as a committee some years ago at improving that spin-out process and how we can cross what I think was called then the Valley of Death. And we've looked at it more than once. Do you then look at the work, because I mean there's been quite a few years gap, do you look at previous work when you're responding to the review on university spin-outs? Did you look at our reports at all, do you know?
So we do, and we have obviously teams that work on supporting as well, and we do look at previous iterations of things, previous areas. Obviously, this was an independent review that was conducted as well, and they not only looked at previous work, but they also spoke to enormous amount of people actually on the ground as to what are the challenges that they're facing today.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. James.
Thank you, Chairman. A question about policy coherence, if I may. So the department has a science and technology framework. It has 6 priorities, as we've discussed. It has 15 or so strategies or visions. Who is responsible for ensuring coherence between all of those and key technologies, and how?
Well, ultimately, I'm the Secretary of State of the department, so it would be me, and also the PermSec as well. And but it's not just, I would argue, down to our department. That was the whole point of doing the Science and Technology Framework, because it is a cross-Whitehall document. Our job now is to hold other government departments account to make sure that we're on track and we're delivering against those 10 pillars, and that when we're spending on research and development, we're being strategic. And we're being coordinated, and we've also set up a grouping of those departments so that we can have better clarity and a better cohesion between us all.
I mean, this is a very boring answer to an important question, but in a sort of boring procedural way. We have a central strategy and coordination team that sits at the heart of the department that's responsible for looking after the science and technology framework in its entirety, including both the kind of cross-Whitehall, supporting the sort of cross-Whitehall activities the Secretary of State was talking about, but also working across our department to make sure, for example, those important linkages between AI and quantum, or semiconductors and AI, or telecoms and space. I think one of the really powerful things about DCIT actually is the strength of that web of connections across the department that lets us act in the system-oriented way described in the framework, rather than always kind of looking at a point solution to an individual issue.
Which was harder before the establishment of the department. So I was in DCMS, and so we had the majority of semiconductors, but not all of it, like half basically. And we would have we had some of AI, but not all of AI. So this makes it much easier to be strategic and have that oversight.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you. So leading on from that, a key element of the framework is the cross-departmental work to embed science, innovation and technology across government. How are you ensuring that is the case? What tools do you have to assist you in that?
Yeah, so by making sure that we are working across Whitehall, both at a ministerial level but also at an official level as well. So we have set up processes in the form of committees, really, to ensure that we're bringing government departments together. We also have a series of bilateral meetings, both at my level and also my junior ministers in the relevant departments. So, for instance, yesterday I met with the Secretary of State for the Department of Education, as one of the key pillars in that science and technology framework is skills.
And is that process working well?
Yes.
Yes, good. And when can we expect DCIT's outcome delivery plan to be published?
So we said we would do it within a year, and that's what we're going to do. So in line with the sort of anniversary of the department, in essence, and what we want to do is really showcase the progress that we've made, but also the progress that we've still got to make. This is a continual journey, and we want to be ambitious.
Apologies for a slight technical correction. What the Secretary of State's talking about there is the Science and Technology Framework Update. Yeah. I think you asked specifically about the ODP.
Oh, I do mean the Science and Technology Framework.
I think the Science and Technology Framework Update will in fact cover a very great deal of content from the ODP, but as a technical matter, you may well have seen the letter from CST and the MCO to select committees that ODPs across government are remaining internal this year. But we would expect actually that update that the Secretary of State was talking about to be a really good opportunity to set out actually what is the majority of our ODP in a public form.
Thank you, James. Stephen Metcalfe again, and then Tracy Crouch.
Thank you very much. There are a number of technologies that the UK is trying to steal the march on, whether that's AI, quantum, one of which, though, is engineering biology.
Yeah.
Wild chase for the
which I think we are doing well in. What specific measures are the government taking to support that aim, both in terms of regulation and resources?
Yeah, so we just published the engineering biology vision, and we've attributed 2 million towards that. It is one of our 5 critical technologies, and it is a key focus of our activity and energy. And we do believe that it is one of the areas that will really help power the growth of our economy. And as you say, we want to remain in our position of leadership on this agenda. One of the things that we've identified is making sure, and this goes across the whole department, that we utilise regulation as a tool for innovation. And that's why at the autumn statement we announced 5 million for a regulatory sandbox, and also why we have tasked the Regulatory Horizon Council with doing a review. I think I might have said 2 million, meant 2 billion on engineering biology.
You said 2 million?
Yeah, I meant billion.
2 billion?
2 billion and 5 million for the sandbox. That's right. A lot of figures.
A lot of figures. So more figures required. How much do you think, I mean, obviously that's a big investment, that 2 billion, but that must be because you think it's going to be worth it as a government, that it will attract inward investment and potential growth. Yeah. What sort of figure can you put on that?
Well, it's not just that, it's also about making sure that you're quite right, that you give industry the clarity and the roadmap and the certainty to choose the UK to invest and to grow. And that's why with all of these technologies, our approach is one that is long-term. Most of the strategies and the visions are for the next 10 years or at least to 2030 to give industry that confidence and know that the UK is not just backing them in the short term. This is a considerable focus that we're investing. I mean, in general, we say that for every £1 that we spend, it garnishes at least £2 of private sector investment. But also when we talk about these technologies, it's not just the monetary return on value. When we look at engineering and biology and the impact that it can have across the board and in our NHS and etc., this is about the real life impact that's important as well as the monetary return on value.
Okay. And where you talk about those figures, and I get the bit you're talking about in terms of there is a health aspect to this, but let's say where you say every pound invested delivers £2 of economic growth. Are those independently verified figures, or are they just an assumption that you use to internally to justify investment in technology?
So a couple of comments. One is actually there isn't, not just in government, but much more broadly than that, there isn't as sophisticated an evidence base as you would want on which components of your R&D spend have the biggest return. I think that's something as a department we're going to really want to look at. Those kind of broader rules of thumb around the economic return from R&D spending are very well underpinned by a wealth of academic literature. So I haven't got concerns at that level. But I just thought it was interesting to note that, really what you'd like to know is, well, exactly how much more will you get from your engineering biology pound versus your quantum pound? And that is a really challenging technical question to answer.
And also they all interlink as well. So.
Yes. Do you think it is possible to answer that question? I mean,
not in its entirety, I'm sure. But I think, you'd rightly want us, now that we kind of have this remit over the coming years, to make that a serious investment of our analytical talent and time.
And that is what we're focusing on. So whilst we have also focused on getting more coherence across the R&D spread across government, we're also focusing on how can we gain a better oversight and insight into the outputs that money is getting us. But as I said a moment ago, it isn't just financial.
No. Okay. You're undertaking that work at the moment?
Yes, yeah.
Any idea when that might be published?
Well,
will it be published, or is it internal?
Well, we would want to be as transparent as possible and to illuminate the value for money that the taxpayer is getting, because at the end of the day, it's not the government's money, it's their money. So I think we should be publishing as much as we possibly can, and that's a piece of work that we're doing with other government departments, because we want to be able to illuminate that across the R&D spend across government.
Okay, thank you. Just final question, really, at this point. Resources are finite. Yeah, there is a limit to how much we can do. But we do still invest heavily in R&D. We're investing in our universities. However, they are under pressure with their funding. Do you have any concerns that universities will divert funds away from investing in capital projects that underpin our R&D ecosystem to sort of push that funding towards the front line, which will undermine our long-term potential?
So, as I said before, I met with the Secretary of State for Education last night, and we work very closely because we rely heavily in our area on our world-beating universities. We've got 4 out of the top 10 universities in the world. We want to keep it that way, and they are absolutely essential. And what's essential is not just keeping the innovations in there, but commercialising that out, as we spoke about a moment ago with the spin-out review. And what the landscape review by Paul Nurse showed was that the diversity across the board is really important as well, but so is resilience. And resilience speaks to making sure that our universities are resilient in this respect as well. And I know that is something that the Education Secretary leads on, working with the OFS and keeping a clear oversight into the financial rigour of universities and the approach that they are taking in these regards.
If I might just very briefly also add that, of course, UKRI, some of its funding goes sort of directly into infrastructure programmes. Indeed, that's a bit over 10% of its total funding, which means that infrastructure investment is sort of protected, for want of a better phrase.
Is that just through STFC?
Not entirely, no.
No.
And we introduced a new fund back in October as well that went directly to universities, 60 million as well.
Okay. And so there is an oversight on making sure that the ecosystem is continually being underpinned and marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Tracy Crouch, then Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Just following on from Stephen's questions around the landscape review, the government's response acknowledged that there were many challenges facing the UK's RDI system, but it also noted that SAPOR's recommendations will be integrated into the implementation of the technology framework, not the AGP. One of those very important commitments was around philanthropic giving. I just wondered if you could perhaps expand on how the government will build relationships with the philanthropic community, but also how the government will provide the accountability and scrutiny of those partnerships.
Yeah, it's a really good question because the scale of the amounts that we're talking about are extremely sizable as well. And this is one of the questions that myself and the Prime Minister actually asked Ken Griffin and Eric Smith, who recently contributed to the biobank. And I think that shows a bit of a model of how we could do this in the future. And it is early days and we want to expand that. And we posed that question, how do we reach more people like you? And what their response was that they said that the reason why they'd really decided to back that project and give such an amount of money was because they really believed in it and they passionately bought into the tangible difference it was going to make. And their advice was to pick projects that people could really get excited about, that were unique. You know, the biobank is extremely a great USP of the UK, and try and excite philanthropists in that way and offer them something that they couldn't potentially get in another nation, and that they could really feel that their pound was going to make a difference. And I think I took away from that conversation that is how we need to be approaching this. And we need to be having those conversations with those individuals, but also those networks. And that's something that we want to now build upon. But it is obviously early days. That was a fantastic agreement, but it's something that we need to continue to build upon.
So those conversations haven't yet started, but it's...
No, we have. So we regularly talk to all... this is not something that is new with me. Secretaries of State in days before me would have had conversations and urged people to give privately as well. What we want to do is really diversify in line with the landscape review. And ensure that we're encouraging more of that big ticket investment to support taxpayers' money.
We've both had the pleasure of working in DCMS, where funding is given on a short-term basis. One of the things that is very important from this is long-term sustainability and consistency of philanthropic partnerships. How does that feature in what it is that you're thinking? And when you were in the States, obviously they do it incredibly well there. Were you taking any learnings, or do you have any conversations about lessons that can be learned from America?
Yeah, they do it extremely well there. I think we are very good in this country of people giving at lower levels, and huge amounts at lower levels. What we're talking about here is big ticket sums from key individuals. And there are different models to provide that long-term security, like endowments. If you look at our fellowships that we just announced in the autumn statement, they're via an endowment model. So there are different models that we can utilise here.
Fantastic. I think something slightly different, but still about research and innovation. What assessment have you made of the ability of catapults to deliver major objectives, particularly in the scaling up of research and innovation for commercial exploitation?
Well, that's one of their key remits, to act almost like a hub and to support industry. And we have 9 of them. We've done several reviews, to your point as to what assessment we've made. We came back to the most recent review the other month. September, there you go. And this is something that we have looked at in great detail. There's been 4 reviews, obviously not all in my tenure, but there's been 4 reviews over the years into categories. Every time that they are requiring additional funding in the cycle, that is given based on their delivery plans and their projected outputs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tracy. We now go to Rebecca.
Thank you. Very briefly, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority reported in around March that significant issues existed for all 4 of DSIT's digital infrastructure programmes. Can you give us an update on the current status of each programme and what you've done to address those issues?
Yeah, I think some of them were amber red before. I believe they're all amber. We will write to you with the full details, but I believe
that's right. All of our IPA government programmes are now rated either amber or green.
Yeah, and so we carefully monitor those. Some of those are key commitments that the government has made. One of them includes Project Gigabit, for instance, where we have gone from 6% to 79.5% as of yesterday. So these are not only important to our department, but also important to the government. So we are carefully monitoring them and making sure that we are making progress.
What were some of the biggest issues and what was done to address them?
I mean, these are huge, large-scale projects. It is not unusual for projects of this scale to sometimes be rated as having some elements of concern. As a department, we have completely gripped them. We've got a key focus on them at a ministerial and official level.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. James Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could turn to a hot topic, that of migration and the impact on UK as a global science superpower, how does the government intend to balance its drive to reduce net migration with the need to attract international talent in the science sector?
Yeah. So obviously, the general public, my assessment, when I have as a constituency MP, is that there is a great deal of concern about levels of legal migration as well as illegal migration, and we made manifesto commitments on this. So I think it is right that the government sticks to its word and deals with this. At the same time, absolutely, do we want to be attracting the very best and the brightest across the science and technology agenda? And we have various routes in to enable that to be possible, like the global talent visa, like the scale-up visa that's only been going about a year-ish, and the high potential visa as well for students that are coming, graduates from some of the world's top universities. So there are many routes in to support the sectors that we represent. And in addition to that, we need to be making sure that we're growing the skills pipeline here in the UK, which is why we've invested so heavily in AI skills, 290 million since 2014, why we're investing in quantum skills, why we're investing in engineering biology, all the critical technologies that we've spoken about, and more.
Thank you. So in terms of the salary threshold now for skilled workers entering the country, many of them 38,700, that is somewhat above the average salary for a postdoc. For example, is an increase in salaries going to be required to tackle that?
There's a few things to this. So what has happened to date is there have been a number of exemptions in place, and we are in conversations as a government to outline exactly what, if any, exemptions would apply. So that would impact there. Yep. Also, as I said, there are other routes in as well, like the global talent visa that isn't pinned to salary, or there is more flexibility around some of the other visa routes.
Yeah, okay. That is positive to hear, but if there is nevertheless a requirement for some of those salaries to go up, could that funding be taken from current R&D allocations?
No, because if the purpose of an R&D grant was specified, it would have to be spent on what it was allocated for instance.
Okay. And so where would you anticipate the increase in funding to come from, or is that?
I think to be able to articulate the full impact that this will have, the full policy will have to be completely published, and then we can write to the committee once we've got any list of any exemptions in particular, and we can detail that.
Okay, thank you. And related to that discussion, there has been a concern about the increasing costs of visas and NHS surcharge and the impact, again, on attracting talent. And do you have any comments in that regard?
It hadn't gone up for over a decade in terms of the cost for the NHS surcharge. And obviously we had considerable inflation during that period of time. And somebody does have to pick up these tabs. And we know that the taxpayer equally has had to go through the cost of living challenges as well. And so I would argue that it wouldn't be fair necessarily to put that back onto them. But we still remain extremely internationally competitive. And when I've spoken to scientists and researchers and academics that have chosen to locate here, they tell me that they've chosen to come here over other nations because we're at the cutting edge of science across the board in many respects. We have fantastic infrastructure and facilities, and we've been continuing to invest in those since the department has been established. We have some of the world's best universities, 4 out of the top 10. You know, these things as well are the things that will really be the magnets to talent. And we also have the Global Talent Network, which is ensuring that we don't just hope that they come, but we actually go out there and try and attract them to come as well.
Mm-hmm. And final question from me for now. How are you ensuring the talent is spread fairly across the UK? So in other words, what is the department's contribution to the levelling up agenda?
We've got lots of work in this. So we've got the launch pads via Innovate UK. We've got the investment zones that we have supported on. One of the new pieces of work that we've been doing recently is our cluster mapping as well, which really illuminates what research and development and activity is in each area, so we can try and utilise that as, again, magnets for further investment. We've been trying to get more of our research and development spend out of just the golden triangle. Yes, we need to recognise our USPs, but we need to make sure that it is spread across the nation. And if we look at the technologies that we're talking about, they aren't concentrated in just the southeast. For instance, quantum. We've got PSI Quantum based in Daresbury, which are world leading. So we do have great success stories, and we need to continue to double down on that.
I thought I'd do a sort of top nerd push, if I may, which is that 2023 was the first year that we published official statistics on R&D broken down on a regional level. And I think that's a really important piece of kind of foundational infrastructure that can now help inform the department's work going forward. And I think shows how seriously we're taking this question of understanding and building on the strengths from right across the UK for this work.
And we have our Salford office.
Yes, so that will solve everything.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's all very encouraging to see. Tracy Crouch, and then I've got a question with Stephen Metcalfe.
And you've clearly pleased him upstairs because the gods aligned and you were in the hot seat when we announced the Horizon deal. But
no, it's a coincidence.
Do you think that the 2-year delay, however, in reaching that agreement for Horizon meant that UK businesses have lost contract opportunities during this time? And supplementary to that, have any mitigations been put in place to support businesses or in place to address that potential loss?
It was hugely disappointing that we had that period of time and period of uncertainty for the sector. And it was certainly not what we wanted to happen and wasn't in line with the TCA, but it was twinned to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So what we did was we bridged the gap with the Horizon Guarantee, and we worked to try and achieve a bespoke deal for the UK. And what we've landed with is not the initial boilerplate one that we could have taken, that everybody said we had to take in the first place. We actually said, no, we want a better deal, not just for academics and businesses, but we also want a better deal for the taxpayer, and that's what we've managed to achieve.
So it's frustrating, but you think actually we got there in the end and it's a better deal than what we could.
Yeah, I think it is definitely disappointing. And our plan A, of course, was to have joined Horizon straight away afterwards. It was in the TCA. But we did try to bridge that gap for the sector in the meantime. And we have ended up with a better deal now.
You had a former ministerial colleague, George Freeman, who gave regular evidence to this committee, and we should put on record our thanks to that. But in this area, in March 2022, he told our equivalent committee in the House of Lords that the UK's fusion programme would really suffer outside Euratom. However, in the deal that's been done, we're not going to associate with Euratom. What has changed from the assessment? I'm sure he was kind of giving the official assessment. He was speaking as a minister between March 22 and the deal that was done.
Yeah, so we engaged heavily with the sector, and the fusion sector themselves told us that they did not want us to associate with Euratom because of the delay that had happened, meant that it would be better for them to receive that money directly, and we've said that we will do that. So we have established the fund of 650 million, which will go direct to the sector, and that's certainly what they wanted, and we wanted to listen to them.
Do you know why they changed their view?
I think because of the delay, they had obviously set up their own networks and their own work in that interim period, and what it would have meant joining Euratom would have been that it would have just not been as effective as giving them the money directly.
Thank you. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk a little bit about your conference speech, if we may. You talked about the steady creep of political correctness. Can you just sort of expand on what you meant by that exactly?
Yeah, so it was raised to me by a number of academics, but also across the board in research and statistics in general, that this question around gender and sex were being conflated, and that academics did not feel confident as to how they should address it. And I cited a number of examples at the time. One of the examples was the ONS was took to the High Court because they put in their guidance that you could change your sex. And there was issues around the police in Scotland. And this is something where we said, okay, the government shouldn't just get involved and produce some guidance and give it to academics. What we should do, actually, is get an academic in the form of Dr. Sullivan to lead on this piece of work and produce guidance and guidelines not only for the scientific community but for the whole of statistics bodies. So she will report directly to both myself and the Cabinet Office.
Okay, thank you. You also recently stated that your preference was for the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Panel, the UKRIs, to be shut down. Why did you think that? Yeah. And what do you think it should be replaced with?
So this is a broader issue, one more of process, really. So it was brought to my attention that one of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion boards, that correct due diligence and process had not taken place before those people were appointed to that board. And I wrote to UKRI to raise this concern and to suggest that they may want to consider ceasing its functions whilst that work was undertaken, and they have launched an independent investigation into this, because there were some remarks made by some of the members on that board that highlighted that perhaps the due diligence process had not been adequately followed.
Right, but the principle of diversity, equality and equity...
I think the principle of equality, diversity and inclusion is obviously written into law and it is important. I think it's also important, though, that we don't use that as a tool for bureaucracy, which is at the heart of the Tickell review that we will come back to in the new year.
Any idea when in the new year?
I am loath to give specific dates because I know you will, if it gets delayed by a day. But what I can tell you is that it is a really important agenda, and I feel very strongly that we need to be empowering and enabling the sector to be able to be as efficient and effective as possible. And one of the ways that we can do that is by tackling unwarranted and unnecessary bureaucracy. And that's why we will be coming back to that review in the new year.
In the new year. Thank you.
So the new year is
it's always busy. If you look at what we've achieved in just the last few months,
you were kind enough when it came to, I think it was AI, to say that you would be responding early in the new year. Is that the case?
Early in the new year too. There you go.
Very good. Thank you. We now go to Rebecca Long-Bailey.
You've just touched on your letter to UKRI. What's your view of UKRI's response to that letter, and when will the investigation or independent review conclude?
I mean, that is obviously a matter for UKRI as to when it will conclude. I met with them with our general sort of stock take meeting the other day that focused more on their work around the grant review, and they raised this issue and said that it was underway and that they were making progress quickly so that they could give everybody clarity.
Thanks. And you've stressed the importance of it being an independent review.
I mean, that is their decision as well. So I didn't mandate that they did this. This was guidance that in effect via my letter.
One thing that's been reported in the press is that your department, presumably at your instruction, compiled a dossier surveilling a number of academics which may or may not have been connected with this particular issue. Is that true? And if so, why did you instruct for that to happen?
So I think you will have seen from the quote in that article that I said I didn't instruct for that to happen. So it is the normal process that when anybody is appointed to a board or a role, etc., within government, as you'll know, that due diligence is undertaken as to into those individuals, especially on things like equality, diversity and inclusion. Some information was gathered for me at the time when there were questions raised about these individuals on comments on this board to inform me as to whether I should write to UKRI or not. I didn't request that information, but it was given to me to assist in my decision-making process.
So it wasn't a compilation of information as part of the due diligence before people were appointed to specific positions. This was in direct response to concerns that had been raised in relation to specific individuals. Is that right?
So what we're talking about is normally the correct process would be due diligence is done or for anybody that's going to be appointed onto a type of board, especially this board, because they will be subject to the Nolan principles as well. And that due diligence would involve looking at their social media accounts and the comments, etc., that are attributed to them and by them. There were concerns raised that hadn't been done. So some information was gathered and compiled and sent to me of public information on social media accounts of what some of these individuals had said. I didn't ask for it, but it was given to me to help with decision-making process as to whether I should write to UKRI or not. But as I said, it was all public stuff.
So aside from any kind of reviews or due diligence processes that might happen pre-appointment with any person that might become connected with the department, can you confirm that there is no surveillance being undertaken on any other persons that aren't going through a due diligence process at the moment?
I think it's really important to be careful on the language here, because at no time has our department conducted surveillance of individuals.
Reviewing the background, social media history, personal information, political views on any other issues.
So we're not gathering personal information on anybody. The normal process that any government department will do when it is appointing people to public office would be, and you will know this, would be for them to do a due diligence checks on what those people have been saying in the public arena. You know, the people on this particular committee are subject to the Nolan principles. They're on a committee, let's not forget, that is dealing with equality, diversity, inclusion. It is not, therefore, unusual to make sure that those people can do that in a non-prejudiced way. Now, that obviously, that I was concerned that that process had not taken place as per the norm, and that is now something that is being investigated, and I'm sure lessons will be learned by UKRI.
So just to be clear, this is a one-off case and that there are no other individuals who might have had their social media history searched by the department and a dossier.
So I think I've been really clear on this, and I can see why you're trying to sort of turn it into something it's not, but every department in government or every arm's length body that was making a public appointment of this nature would do a due diligence process which would involve looking at people's social media accounts and akin. That is not abnormal, that is normal. What the problem that we've got here is that it is suggested, and there's a proper investigation going into, that process hadn't taken place, and that's the investigation that's happening. Now, that was brought to my attention, and in order to inform my decision-making as to whether I should approach UKRI or not, and to better understand what exactly had happened, some information was given to me to detail exactly what was happening and what was going on, just like you would expect me to make evidence-based and informed decisions across the board on anything. I want to be crystal clear, at no point has our department undertaken any surveillance on anybody. At no point are we tracking academics or anything of that nature.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Can you give your assurances that the governments will play a very careful role in shaping the future appointments on external advisory panels, particularly for UKRI? What are your general thoughts on this going forward?
That would be a decision for UKRI. What I'm concerned about is making sure that processes are followed.
Would you presumably with the action that your department's taken in relation to the due diligence process, would you be planning to take a more active role in UKRI appointments now?
No, this is just about making sure that the correct process is followed. We're not saying who should or shouldn't be on this panel. We're just saying that processes need to be followed and upheld.
Can you give us assurances that funding decisions for research will still be taken independently of government?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question of that at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Tracy Crouch, then James Davis.
Given we're bouncing around your department faster than the speed of light, let's turn to quantum.
Did you practice that?
I genuinely feel I'm really proud of myself for thinking that out as the non-scientist on here. Has the Office of Quantum delivered any reports to the National Science and Technology Council on its delivery progress of the National Quantum Strategy?
I don't think it has. Am I correct in saying that, Sarah?
Not to my knowledge. It's still relatively early days. That strategy was published in March.
I was on maternity leave for 3 months, but to the best of my knowledge, I do not think it happened during that time either.
In which case, I'm sorry to ask, but can you provide a timeline for when a report will be provided to the council?
So we are sort of working through all of these critical technologies, but we would anticipate that within the first 6 months of next year.
We actually said in the strategy that we would update not just to them, but broadly to the public in spring. So it's another one for the busy agenda early next year. But that will be, around a year after the strategy was published, which we think is the right timing.
Thank you.
Early next year is going to be a very busy time for the department. James Davis.
Sticking with quantum, there's a concern about an international shortage of quantum skills. So what progress has been made in establishing the Quantum Skills Task Force and developing the Quantum Skills Action Plan?
Yeah, so the action plan will be published next year and informed via the task force. The task force has already had its first meeting and has been formed. We're also working with the Department for Education and developing a quantum apprenticeship programme, and we have pledged to train over 1,000 quantum PhD students over the next 10 years as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much indeed. We've just got a few kind of supplementary questions before we finish. Just if I could go back to the Rosalind Franklin laboratory, just to help you in your inquiries here. In fact, our colleague on the committee, Carol Monaghan, who can't be here because she's speaking elsewhere in Parliament at the moment in Westminster Hall, she asked a question on the 15th of November in DCIT oral questions about the appearance on Rightmove of the Rosalind Franklin laboratory. And the Minister Griffith said that he would come back on that. It hasn't done so. Can I ask you to look at this urgently and to bear in mind one thing in particular? One of the concerns about the creation of the new department, it has many things in its favour, is the risk that there is a division between departments and that the health department being responsible for one thing, the business department another, the energy department another, that there may not be coherence. As the lead science department, will you make sure that you take the responsibility for looking at the scientific interests of the nation in the use of this site and come back to the committee as soon as you can?
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll make sure that the response is given to Carol Monaghan very shortly as well. But as I said, this is not something that we're not working on. It was just I was not in a position to give the further details today. We can write to you.
And the Chair's right to point out that ultimately this is a DHSC lead. That doesn't mean at all that we're not interested. I've been confirming while we've been talking that our team are working actively on the question with DHSC. But ultimately, if you're asking why we haven't had the detailed answers today, that is because fundamentally it would be for DHSC ministers to answer to that question.
Well, in some ways, this is a test of the department's leadership across Whitehall. That the creation of a department for science with cabinet representation is to, as it were, upgrade the strength and the position of science across government, not to see it downgraded so that things are within the remit of other departments and therefore not relevant.
And that's why we're working very closely with DHSC behind the scenes on this.
Okay, well, we're very grateful for your response on that. Some further final supplementaries from Stephen Metcalfe and then Graham Stringer and then Tracy Crouch.
Thank you very much. I'm slightly loath to ask these questions, and I can't even blame the clerks for them. They are entirely my own invention.
All my own work.
All my own work. As has been mentioned, we are about to launch an inquiry into astronomy. And at our briefing last week, one of the questions was, what is the purpose of astronomy? And we were given some very excellent answers. But one of them was to look for the evidence of extraterrestrial life in any form. Let's not kid ourselves, we're looking for little green men. And I think that would fundamentally change our understanding of our place in the universe if we were to find evidence of life outside of Earth. Does the government specifically fund the search for extraterrestrial life, or is it just through the general astronomy program? And secondly, if life were found in whatever form, does the government have a plan about how that would be shared with the public? Is it just trickle out of the 6 o'clock news, or is there, is it on the risk register, for example?
To the best of my knowledge, it is not on the risk register. Obviously, in terms of the communication plan, that would depend on the exact specifics of the hypothetical that we're talking about, and how it would play out, and would also be a cross-government undertaking with particular Cabinet Office involvement.
If I might just add very briefly, we have a small effort within our space team looking at the question of how we would handle such an announcement. But by the way, by far the most likely scenarios here are not ones that would feature on the risk register. These are actually, the finding of what is likely to be, relatively local, relatively unadvanced microbial life. It could actually be a really important catalysing moment for the UK science community. And
you can see why I'm loath to ask the question, because I can hear sniggering.
Not from me, Stephen.
Because actually, we are looking for it. You've just so I just wondered, where, how seriously that is taken, and it is taken to a level
appropriately seriously.
Appropriately seriously. This is going to get even more. Wait for the sniggers. But while we were in the States, doing our AI inquiry, there were hearings taking place on the Hill about unidentified aerial phenomena. Does the government have any views on those, or did it look on with astonishment? Does it have departments that look at these things as well? Are they thinking of having hearings on UFOs?
I mean, we're not planning on any hearings at the moment, but of course we work very closely with our allies on all of these topics, and we have a goal to be one of the most innovative space sectors in the world, and our relationship with America on this agenda is incredibly important.
Were you surprised they held those hearings?
I don't think I was surprised. I was intrigued.
Yes, I think we're all intrigued. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting to note that there is, in terms of our preparedness, a preparedness for communication should such a discovery be made. It's a fascinating learning. Graham Stringer and then Tracy Crouch.
It's just a couple of quick questions. I think all this committee is pleased that science is directly represented in the Cabinet. How will the country be different now that it is represented in Cabinet?
So I think that we will, we already are, much more strategic on this agenda, that we can really hold the rest of the government to account and deliver on that science and technology framework. And having this sole department that is dedicated to science, innovation and technology enables us to do that, because we have a lot more of the levers and the areas sitting completely with us, and also much more oversight over the entire picture that is happening across Whitehall. And so what will it mean for the country? It will mean that we can continue to lead the way in all of the technologies that we've spoken about today in the scientific agenda, and that we can continue to push above our weight, which tangibly will mean that we grow our economy by investing in R&D. It's the only long-term way to increase living standards, and that we can get these technologies and improvements actually deployed within our public services quicker, and that we can speed up adoption.
Thank you. I used to ask really mean questions to science ministers who didn't have a scientific background. I'd ask them whether they knew the second law of thermodynamics. Most of them didn't, your predecessors. But there is something behind that question. I'm intrigued by somebody with a non-scientific background, how you deal with the science department and all the technicalities. Is it a bonus not being a scientist, or is it a difficulty? How do you deal with it?
I mean, it is the norm across our governmental system. For example, the health secretary is not a medic. For example, this is how, because I would argue that what is important to be an effective Secretary of State is to be able to deliver, to be able to lead and bring people together, and to be able to listen. And one of the things that I really pride myself on is the level of engagement, because I think that is particularly important, not just presuming that you know what is best for sectors or for the individuals on the ground, but getting out there and actually listening and understanding and getting under the skin of issues to then be able to develop the policies that are in line with that.
You don't think there's either an advantage or a disadvantage in not having a scientific background?
I'm under no. I've never made any secret of the fact that I am not a scientist, nor was I, when I was in the Department for Education for 3 years, a former teacher. But what I am is somebody who is a politician that will listen and engage and lead and deliver. And so I would say judge me on my outcomes rather than what degree I did, however many years ago that was, over 20 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tracy Crouch.
There was once a sports minister who had a background in sport, but it never caught on as a concept.
There's been several.
I was going to say that you look like you're having fun. It actually feels like a round peg in a round hole. And so I was going to ask you, if you had no Downing Street grid, if you had no Sir Humphrey or Sarah Mumby calling you courageous, if you had no constraints, what would you do? What would be your real sort of kind of passion? Because you genuinely look like you are enjoying your portfolio. You are making great progress in things that have been very difficult to overcome. So what are the things that you would really like to see with no constraints, no funding, no Downing Street telling you what to do, nothing? What would you like to do next year?
So I think we've got a busy programme next year that we've outlined already. So I think that will certainly keep me on my toes. But the three areas that I think are particularly important to focus on, and the three things that both the scientific community and the technology community have laboured the point to me, which are the game changer levers, and they are skills, scale up, and regulation. So making sure that we do have that skills pipeline to be able to be a science and technology superpower in the future, and to be able to embrace the things like AI. Making sure that we are using regulation as a tool for innovation, which we've already begun with some of our work on sandboxes, or our approach to AI, or as we outlined, quantum and engineering biology. And then the third one is very much about the scale-up aspect, and the fact that we're really good at startups in this country, but we have not been as effective as we could be at scale-ups. And we've done some great work across the board as a government on that, like the Mansion House reforms, the lifts, with the spin-out review, etc. But they're the three areas that I particularly want to double down on, because I think that they will make a tangible difference.
Okay. It's a really good politician's answer, and
Your
permanent secretary is very pleased with it.
Exclusive.
We've got a long list of things that we're looking at here, and Stephen has obviously just showed his interest in UFOs. I'm really interested in mushrooms and the science around mushrooms. So there's lots of different areas of the scientific kind of world which are not, in that kind of very formulaic kind of priority plan. Is there anything that you've seen that you think actually that would be really interesting just to progress? Mushrooms, for example. Is there anything that you have seen that you think actually I'd like to see a little bit more about that?
I think across the board there are an incredible, enormous amount of exciting initiatives that will transform people's lives. So AI, for instance, is going to be completely revolutionary. And to have led as a department on that summit and our policies today and going forward, I think will have an enormous legacy for generations to come, and that it interlinks with all of the technologies. But if we think about things like life sciences and the missions that we've got there, I think there's some exciting work that we need to double down on them. And in particular, the data of our NHS, obviously that is working with the Department for Health, but that is a untapped resource at the moment. So that's something that particularly excites me, because that's a great USP of the United Kingdom that we could be doing a lot more with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. And finally for me, perhaps as a counterpoint to Graham's question, you're the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. We are the Select Committee on Science, Innovation and Technology. But in truth, we are both responsible for the research base generally, which includes the arts and humanities and the social sciences. How do you ensure that these important areas, with the creative industries being of particular importance to us, how do you make sure that they don't get eclipsed by the very exciting developments in sciences as conventionally understood?
Yeah, so it is really important. Obviously, we don't make those decisions as to where the exact money goes to the principle that was raised before, but a lot of these topics are multidisciplinary. If we look at the ethics, for instance, in a lot of these topics like engineering, biology, like AI, so it's important that the social science aspect of these are coming through, and that when we're spending on research and development, that it is going across the board on those topics. Is why we've also focused on the risk element of a number of these technologies as well, in which we rely on those expertise. And so this is important as an agenda, that we aren't just focused on one side at all.
Thank you. Ms. Munley, anything to add?
No, I don't think so.
Can I thank the Secretary of State and the Permanent Secretary for a very comprehensive appearance before the committee today, helping us with AI and generally scrutiny across the Department's remit. Can I thank, since this is the last meeting in public of the year, we have a private meeting next week, can I thank our excellent clerks team for all of the hard work that they put into preparing these briefs and our reports. We're not going to be asleep over the Christmas period. We'll be publishing a very important report on bacteriophages and their role in antimicrobial resistance. So that